Riverside. Do, 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 do. Like that.
Yeah. Here we are. We're live.
Oh,
One person watching and one person liked it. I.e. me.
is you? Talking to you, Mike?
Are we
Right.
all mic'd up? Why don't we have a flashier studio?
Because we're trying to build a studio for YouTube exclusively.
Yeah, I suppose. The lads are all here.
Like
What's on the schedule today? Are we just Q&Aing?
I don't like this chat on this.
You
after.
don't?
No, I prefer looking on the YouTube after. It feels more, you know.
Feels more YouTubey or it feels better?
It just feels.
Or is
better.
it just because that's how it's always been?
It's probably just how it's always been, you know. Also,
Oh, we're splitting screens.
saying it feels better. That feels weird to say that out loud.
You wouldn't like to admit that, like.
I just wouldn't use that phrase. Like, is my only thing.
What's going on here? We have two screens.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're using the other chat for popping the questions up on screen.
Well, Dumb Cumster City.
Jesus, lads.
He's getting lucky catching you live lately. Getting lucky, eh?
Would ye, just as a word of warning for everyone who wants to get their question answered, it is better to bang in the questions as early as you can.
What's with the language today?
Bang them in.
Yeah, this is no need. Banana bread says, love you, lads. You know,
Banana bread, we love you too.
I fucking love banana bread. I have so many different banana bread recipes in my head. I realized recently I should have been writing down all the recipes over the years. You know, when I go through a phase
There's still time on.
where no, there's not time, right? I'll tell you why. Because you know, I go through a phase where I try and make pizza.
Yeah.
I've been making pizza for about a month, 2 months.
And then you stop and you never make it again.
And I never make it again, you see. And then I never write down the final recipe. And the one thing you need to learn is that recipes are always wrong, you know?
Oh, the recipes you would have been using first day.
Yeah, they're wrong. Like,
So you wanted the final version, like.
my perfected recipe is gone forever.
Right.
And then it's just when I started again, so my wife might say, would you make pizza? And then I'm like, no, where's the
You
recipe?
can't remember.
Can't remember. Because I'll have different variations as well, you know?
Yes.
A lot of times I'll make things up based on the ingredients I had. Remember the phase I went through making massive cookies?
Yeah.
Can't remember that recipe. Made cookies there the other day.
But was it not just a slightly less doughy cookie recipe?
Slightly less. Oh, Jesus! Don't even. Adam was in it early.
Adam says slightly rounder shoulders or more pec separation.
Slightly rounder. I don't get the context. I'm not even sure what this context.
He's saying it's more visually appealing or what?
Slightly rounder shoulder or more. Oh, maybe more visual.
So like more capped off delts?
As someone who has absolutely zero pecs, I'm probably going to say shoulders. How's that? Not much bicep either. Bit of a shoulder. No, I don't think the pecs would do it for me.
Callum says, lads, do you think more weightlifters will get in the enhanced games? I think this is my little 10 cents for what this is worth. I think we're going to see loads of people declaring for the enhanced games over the next 12 to 18 months. And I reckon there mightn't necessarily be a lot of events happen. I think it has a lot of momentum right now, but I'll be very interested to see what happens in the next year or so.
My problem with the enhanced games was that it was kind of made out to be this. It was going to be the equivalent of an Olympics where all the athletes are going to get together and they're going to be in this place and they're going to do them, and they're like, we're going to do it in Australia, and then they're like, no, we're going to do it in the UK.
Yeah.
And now it's once-off training events that go on Instagram. From what we're seeing, it's evident that they're trying to sell their TRT stuff, which is fine. Again, selling stuff isn't necessarily a problem, but it's not really turning out to be what it was kind of promised to be.
Yeah.
Now, I saw today Wes Kitts was saying in the comments that they want them to go to Abu Dhabi and to train under supervision of doctors. And what I want to know, when we were talking about this earlier, is I'm not accusing anyone, but if any of the athletes are actually honest about their past PED use, were they like, okay, so you went to the Olympics, did you use PEDs before? And they're like, no, nothing. Okay, well, we've been giving you PEDs for 6 months and your results are lower. Oh, interesting. I don't know how that happened. Whoa.
I'm gonna say it right now that
Holy heck.
I don't think very many of those athletes will tell the truth to the enhanced games people.
John, I wouldn't tell the truth either.
No.
John said, I know the world champions can be hit or miss, but whoa, did I miss Lash in the supers? Yeah, I didn't actually watch the supers because I wasn't too enthused about it. And it turned out to be an absolute bloodbath looking at the misses. 110s will be the class to watch. And I think this 79s, was it? Will probably be pretty good. 88 should be solid. 94s are hard to tell. You know, not to SHIT and Carlos, obviously he's a great lifter, but if we look at the total of the 94s, we're doing, you know,
who won the 94s?
Carlos won them. He won them at 172 to 22, and the Iranians snatched 182 to set an actual world record. But you know, if you looked at London 94s, for example, the top three snatches, or top three, were 185, and in obviously the clean jerk 223. You know, on the flip side, then I wouldn't be too harsh on Carlos in the fact that obviously, you know, the Worlds the year after Olympics is
I was just
typically.
about to say.
But this is their second Worlds because we had Worlds last year as well.
I
Remember?
know, but Worlds last year didn't mean anything.
Now, there was a lot of questions, obviously, on Carlos around the snatching. So he missed 2 snatches, which we don't normally see him doing.
I think this World is always going to be a little mediocre.
There was a lot of questions around Carlos's coaching team.
Yeah.
Which
I think
we refrained from making any comment on, you know.
Yeah. And there was...
For once.
And I think some of those questions might have been put to bed, or at least pushed further down the road.
Yeah, pushed down further on the road.
He won Worlds. He set a world record in the clean and jerk, which is the major thing. I would have had questions about seeing what the back squats looked like.
Yeah.
I think, if anything, it gives the new approach a bit more time, which is not necessarily a bad thing. You know, if you get some new people in, it does take time. You're dealing with one of the strongest people in the world and influencing his absolute strength lifts. It's gonna take a little bit of settling in to see if that's gonna do anything.
It does seem kind of stupid, though.
Anyway, refraining from making a comment says, Banana Bread says, question regarding Dr. Sika, PhD. Love you, lads.
Sorry, now before you go on with the question,
has that video been released?
No,
shit talk.
No, but the damage this is good done to people with sports science PhDs in the influencing realm has got to be incalculable.
Yeah.
Continuing, sorry, my bad.
There's a shit talk coming out. Will that come out this week?
I'll see. I must listen to it back.
There's a shit talk we did talking about this exact topic for an hour. And there's a video that will probably come out in 2 weeks of a proper video in the gym talking about this topic that talks about all of this, Banana Bread. I think
he's joking, obviously.
Yeah. The Carolosnas are eating raw pork hot dogs and a gallon of sour cream and the West Side squats. Like, the fact that people think those kind of things are at odds with what sports science stands for and what sports science does. Sports science is not like at odds with people training in different modalities. It's literally just writing down what happens.
The thing with Carlos's training is the fact that he's clearly ferociously talented and trains really hard and has a huge bank of training 15 odd years in a specific way that got him to his current shape. And everyone who's done bigger lifts than him has trained completely opposite. So, not in your case, Banana Bread, but I saw a lot of people trying to post-rationalize some of the stuff that he was doing in his training when, yeah. WBT Gold said, my left shoulder dislocated real bad a year and a half ago. So I'm recovered, but still weak, loose on the left. What exercises did you keep me doing feel more stable doing powerlifting? You've a bit of experience with dislocated shoulders.
Yeah, absolutely. So the major thing with the shoulder injuries, to make sure you return to good full range of motion use. A lot of the time with the shoulder injuries, we tend to see people being kind of permanently internally rotated, or they might lack full abduction of the shoulder. So getting that back to just normal baseline use, good mobility everywhere, movement without pain is the number one thing. It sounds like you kind of got there. The next movement that would go from there is basically motor skill learning. So we dislocate the shoulder and we do any amount of damage to any of those joints. A lot of the thing we lose when we return to sport is the physical literacy of bringing that joint through a full range of motion. If you imagine over years and years of use, it's like your body is learning what's inside in the dark room, right? And every time you go to a range of motion, you shine a torch around that room. And our nervous system is basically learning. Every time we shine the torch around, every time I bring the joint through a range of motion, I shine a torch around the room and I understand where those kind of dark corners in the range of motion lie. When we do that kind of large scale damage to a joint, whether it's tearing tendons, ligaments, maybe doing some nerve damage, we lose a lot of that. And you have to essentially go back to baseline learning with a lot of those pieces. So when you say you feel like you lack stability, it's very similar to people's ankles, very similar in the knee. We lack stability through a physical loss of that kind of knowledge and of the sensory awareness within the joint. So a lot of motor skill learning work, things down to throwing a ball single-handedly, catching things with that hand, regaining hand-eye coordination, and then in tandem with that, fundamental strength lifts. So strict press, single arm overhead pressing, single arm overhead squatting, all of those things will really, really help. But it's developing that skill again, and in tandem with that, developing that outright strength in the joint or in those associated muscle groups is going to be the major pathway to success.
I'd add in a single arm overhead walks as well to that.
Yeah. There's a super liker commenter thing
I
here.
don't see a super likes here.
Super likes. It's Baker.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Baker.
Baker says currently running an organic chemistry, physics, judo, S&C, and toddler split. Any tips, lads?
So, first of all, organic chemistry is the worst of any of the sciences. Physics is actually fine. It's just formulas. Judo is great fun. S&C, toddler split. So, any tips? I suppose really you need to start by prioritizing what the priorities are. What is the most important thing here? You know, are you a professional athlete who's also doing your undergrad or your BSc here in physics or chemistry, but you've also got to compete at Europeans next year and you've got this toddler? So you would obviously assume default the toddler would take priority in regards to this. So I would imagine everything else is operating based off of time spent with toddler and supporting family is the most important thing. So you're operating, what can you do around that? And then unless, again, assuming that you're a professional athlete, the judo and the S&C are going to take a back seat. So then you need to start prioritizing organic chemistry, physics. So how much lecture time do you have? How much extra reading time do you have? Do you do any extra reading or any extra studying? Most would say no, and it's, you know, I didn't do any.
It's okay.
Joking. So prioritizing those next and then seeing where do you have time left? When do you have it? And then looking at when are your next competitions for judo? Do you have any competitions for judo? What is your goal with judo? How important is judo performance to you? Is the act of doing judo the important thing here? Is it just fun to do? Or is judo something where you're like, I'm going to win gold at nationals next year or something like that? So then you have to start deciding if judo is really important and there's big competitions that you need to hit. Then you need to start looking at when those competitions are. Then you need to start looking at how do you structure that S&C around those competitions. If you go back on the YouTube channel, there is a video where I went through Ono Shosei's competition calendar for a couple of months where I broke this down a lot. So Baker, I don't know if you've seen that. So if you check that out, you'll be able to see a bit more in depth on what you would do through each one of those phases. And then in terms of S&C, if it's a hobby, you can get pretty concurrent with your judo and your S&C. So you can say 2 judo sessions a week, 2 strength training sessions a week, and then maybe 1 and 1.5 where you overlap a conditioning session. And then do that pretty concurrently throughout the year and you should see good progress. But it all depends on priorities, how far you want to push some of these things, you know, and obviously assuming you want to be a good baker, which I'm assuming father, unless it could be the mother, then you would assume toddlers first. So there's probably going to be later night sessions or early morning sessions or a mix of both of those. So again, priorities is how this and how important certain things take, and then how much of that pie chart do each one of these goals take up for you. So I'm going to assume it's toddler, undergrad, and then S&C for sport. So concurrent is probably, so when we say concurrent, you still have phases when you're going through for each competition, but if you're a recreational hobbyist judo, just get nice and consistent with your strength training sessions, get them in, get some conditioning done, you'll see good progress. Will it be the best judo athlete you could be, both physically and technically? Absolutely not, but it'll be the most sustainable long term for your life.
Smiliev says, how high should a caloric surplus be for a weightlifter coming off a small cut, looking to add lean mass in a bodybuilding program?
So what I'd actually do here first is I would do a maintenance phase for a while. So weightlifters, we can make the mistakes of thinking we need more calories than we actually do. So what I would do here is go for a maintenance phase for a while, enact the bodybuilding program, and then see what kind of changes happen when you switch to a bodybuilding focus after a cut. So let's say your maintenance calories now are 2.5. See what the next kind of 4 to 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks looks like when you're doing maintenance calories and some bodybuilding. And if you see a good difference, and you might see a decent change in muscle mass or maybe body composition after 2 months of consistent maintenance. So if we're looking at probably high protein, high carbs, and whatever fats you deem appropriate to fit in there to be healthy and happy, then I would see what kind of surplus you'd need after that. So if you're not seeing any changes muscle mass wise, so again, this kind of comes in, I think, where people talk about this weight on the scales doesn't mean anything. It definitely means something, but in the context of what you're trying to do, you're probably trying to be more efficient, more better power to body weight ratio, staying in a weight class. So in this case, I would see what a maintenance does to your muscle mass and your body composition for a while, and then probably maximum, I would say, 250 calories extra a day. Once you have a solid idea of what your actual maintenance calories are, then I would look at what is probably 250 most, and then see how that goes and see what it does to the muscle mass again after maybe another 2 months, and kind of evaluate from there.
Kaiser says, hey lads, I've never snatched before. How do I find the grip width for snatch grip deadlifts to get the bar to sit in the hip crease and feel super wide? So sitting the bar into the hip crease is the way you'd find it. So basically, you can hinge over, put the bar in the hip crease, and then move your hands out to your elbows, lock out, and then double check that by standing upright with the barbell in a hook grip and lifting one leg up. And that will give you a good idea for roughly where the barbell should be.
So you can basically stand with the bar in your hands, and then when you bend your knees like this and your chest up, the bar should be pretty much in here. If your grip is too narrow, the bar will be down here. If your grip is too high, it'll be close to your belly button.
One thing, when you say it feels super wide, it probably will feel super wide if you've never snatched before. It'll feel like you've no kind of contact between your arms or your body. This is actually what catches a lot of people. They feel like they have none of that biomechanical stacking happening between their arms and their lats, particularly if you're taller or have longer arms. It's going to feel very wide. And so it is just something you'll have to get used to.
John said, are we being denied Russian supers? Has never seen more glaring this past Worlds. I think what we're seeing is a possibly temporary, or hopefully temporary, average performance reduction, I suppose, across elite weightlifting. So there's clearly plenty of lifters. There was multiple A, B, C, and D groups, when I remember at Worlds this year from looking at the start list. So there's definitely a lot of people weightlifting, but obviously the environment with which people are lifting and the results across, a lot of the classes, except for a few outliers, it has been that way since, to be honest, since the purge in 2016. What was the Christian thing where they were the Inquisition?
The Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition.
Since the Spanish Inquisition into weightlifting.
The WADA Inquisition.
We're certainly not in 2014 anymore for weightlifting. And I'm going to say this as a fan, but also as a content creator, it's definitely not as good for a sport, which is a thing we did say years ago. If you looked at any of those podcasts with Seb or Zach, less big results would be less popular weightlifting, I think.
Yep.
But the funny thing is there's more people than ever trying to do snatch and clean and jerk, which is obviously great. And long may it last, of course. But I'm definitely seeing, even if you take Instagram posts or hyper on Worlds, or how I would feel personally as a fan, before you could be looking at like any number of weight classes being like, they're going to be lifting and they're going to be lifting. Now, realistically, coming into, say, the 94 kilo class, Carlos was probably the only person anyone really was hyper aware, unless you were super diligent with it. Or, you know, you would have seen some of the Iranians training, and you might have seen some of the lifts in training or in the Iranian national competitions. But yeah, it's an interesting stage for weightlifting. Who knows what'll happen?
Shipper says, can tight quads cause knee pain when squatting? I can handle almost any lower body exercise, but as soon as I back squat, the pain returns even at light weights. So tight quads, firstly, we're not going to answer an injury question, but tight quads, generally speaking, lead to a lot of discomfort, pain, leading into tendonitis, tendinopathy, issues with the quadriceps tendon and patella tendon, because tight quads are tight for 24 hours a day. And then obviously as you train, that area is already under stress. It's already inflamed. And when you train certain movements, that's really going to pin the patella against the front of the knee, really going to put a lot of pressure on the quadriceps tendon and the patella tendon. So tight quads are never good. What I will say is, in terms of the back squat, you say an interesting thing here. You can do almost any lower body exercise without inducing any of that knee pain. Then the knee pain comes back even at light weights during the back squat. There's probably two things going on here. The first thing is, are you stimulating the quads effectively during any of the other exercises? And what I mean by this is, even if you're doing something super specific like quad extensions or isometric quad extension holds, you're not really stressing those tendons and stimulating those tendons to grow and adapt all that much, because they're not in stretch positions, and they're not in stretch positions while under load. The back squat, particularly the back squat where the toes are pointed quite far forward and the knees are traveling very far forward over the toes, is one of the rare occasions where we have a massive amount of load going through that system and we are achieving as much flexion as we physically can. This isn't really emulated in any of the other movements like single leg split squats, unless we're really driving that foot or knee far forward over the foot. It's certainly not emulated in most of the other lower body accessories we see, like lunges or things like that. And so you get to this interesting point where you might be doing a massive amount of training of the lower body and legs without necessarily stimulating the area you actually need to see adaptation happening in. And it might just be that case where the back squat's the only thing that's really triggering that. If that is the case, I go to something like heel raised belt squats. So really pushing those knees very far forward. You could look at doing very slow and controlled tempo front squats, see if that starts to stimulate that area. And that might give you an indication there if it's something where you have a deficit in the amount of training that's actually happening to that joint. The second thing I would say with that is you just need to look at the general appearance of your squat. What's the motor pattern like in your squat? Are you doing a good morning, then driving the knees forward into the bottom position, then shooting the knees back again? These kind of areas, or these kind of motor patterns, can definitely cause issues for the knees. We might have a case where you're putting a hell of a lot of weight forward, maybe ball of the foot or onto the toes as you sit down in the squat. We're not really actually squatting with very good squat mechanics, and we're overloading the anterior chain, so the quads and the knees, rather than having a really good balance between the anterior and posterior. That could certainly be the case as well.
There we go. Are the weight classes changing again? I'd heard that they might be going, I think, one of the hook grip videos, but I don't know if they actually will.
If experience has taught us anything, it's that they probably will change again.
Whatever the worst decision for weightlifting is, that's probably what's going to happen. Well, that's what he thoughts on Carlos's S&C coach. I listened to Steps podcast and why he snatched 170 facing different directions. No, I haven't. Yeah, we don't really want to be, our usual thing is we don't want to be shitting on our coaches, and I suppose he's active, and he's trying to do his best. I think you can probably guess what our thoughts on that would be. I suppose success leaves clues, and then if you look at what has Carlos's previous success, or what has other people who've done more than Carlos done, and then you'd wonder what would be the need to change that drastically. Now, obviously, the rehabbing the shoulder is very important. They said his shoulder feels a lot better and they thought it needed surgery. So there's obviously some positives in that regard. But there is a lot an S&C coach wouldn't necessarily understand about some sport-specific activities, which is why the roles are almost always separate. But time will tell. We'll see by the next Olympics, 2025, so in 3 years' time, if they're still going along this metric. It's the first time we've ever seen Carlos miss two snatches like that. So is that the start, or is that just an anomalous result?
Wade says, for those weightlifters who have long arms and short torsos and struggle hitting their pubic bone in the snatch, is it better to have a wider grip width or slight arm bend? It's always wider grip width. And then after wider grip width, even if that's not helping and your arms are still too long, you go to making contact in the upper third of the quads. So making slightly lower contact. It's never to bend the arms. If you want a rule, don't never ever bend your arms. That's it.
If Lasha cannot bend his arms,
Yeah.
You're off to a good start. You just need to figure out how to keep that close during the second pull. You need to understand the above the knee position and the torso position, and you need to understand the timing of when your hips come into the barbell, and then how you're guiding that barbell without bending your arms to get it. But as Dara said, the lower contact is never a necessarily issue. It's the widest grip if you're super long arms, and then lower contact point is totally fine as long as you keep it close after the lower contact. Latest on Epsom visit, we won't be doing it this year. We were looking at doing the squat clinic, but we're going to Scotland next week, and then we've just a lot of other work to do. And the squat clinics and stuff are great fun to do, but we've other work to do. As fun
Next
as
year.
As fun as they are, yeah, probably next year.
Sev, what do
Whoa, you skipped Dwayne, right? And he said the answer
Wait, are
is
you on?
no, I'm just on this chat.
I've Sev.
Do you not have Dwayne above him?
No.
But he said the answer is gear, which probably is the right answer to every question, is more gear.
Sev said, what do you think will be the impact of the enhanced games with regards to PEDs? If they don't break Olympic or world records, will more people realize that tested athletes use PEDs too?
Actually, do you know what's an interesting thing for this question that I hadn't thought about is I never thought about what it would actually affect PED use, because obviously the research is essentially non-existent. There's very little research, since basically the 80s or 90s. So it would be interesting if they are actually doing some kind of research and if they'll publish it somewhere, wherever it might let them publish that. That could be actually interesting in regards to PED use. Now, we obviously have to assume again that everyone is being truthful with testers and testees, but in regards to its effect on PEDs, it could be interesting, but on the same time, that field obviously has changed massively the last few years in terms of those GLP antagonists, and then we've got a load of other peptides and things becoming super prominent. The amount of questions we've had recently and people asking us what do we think of using PEDs and is there side effects and stuff. First of all, don't ask us about PEDs and what you should do, because that's not our forte. But yeah, it's interesting, these kind of actions for the individual becoming more common. So in that regard, it could be interesting if they do publish something. But I think most people will realize now that, actually, that's not true.
I was just about to say.
That's actually not true. Most people don't realize.
I think there's still a massive disconnect between even what the published data out there will tell us about the prevalence of PED use in tested sport. Like the amount of people, even if you look at like real popular sports, track and field, 100-meter sprint, the amount of people who are sprinting really fast times and winning on the world level or at the elite level who are popped. People still don't want to believe that at Olympic level people are using PEDs. And I don't think the enhanced games will do anything to change that.
Oh, I think it might.
I think there's too much emotional backing behind a lot of it for people.
But you need to think about the right person doing it, or enough people doing it. Enough of the right people doing something will have to force a certain percentage of people to be like, hang on a minute, they didn't beat the best times. Now, there's a certain percentage of those people who will just be like, oh, they were just clearly better,
Yeah.
My favorite thing that the average person says, and even people who are involved in training go, is, oh, you took a shortcut. You're like, it wasn't a shortcut.
No, it's not.
It's
you can't ever get there.
Yeah, a shortcut implies that you would have got there eventually without training. Now, certainly some people have results, obviously, that they could have done natural. But there's idea that PEDs are getting you there faster. No, you're never getting there. There's things that will never be done without PEDs. Now, someone else would make an argument that there's a random genetic combination of someone out there who could do without PDs, which I'd agree
Yeah.
in terms of like statistically. But in reality, what do we see is happening is you don't see that happening. I think we were talking about this last week in terms of weightlifting, and I don't want to say any specific numbers, but there's certain things that just haven't been lifted with a certain ball of gear. You know, realistically, is it possible there's someone out there? Absolutely, I'd always leave the door open for that. But you know, from insider trading from people
Yeah.
who would know, uh, you just don't seem to see anyone doing, say, certain numbers in terms of just weightlifting, even specifically, without a certain dosage, you know. And if you ask and the people who know, and they might, if they're willing to tell you the truth. So, in terms of what to do, it might be interesting for PED research. I never actually thought about that until I kind of read the question in that fashion. The average person, I suppose, there's probably another question there is, does it matter? You know, does it make a difference?
Yeah. I think that's something that definitely came up in the team sports world. You know, there's a lot of talk about rugby and different nations and the amount that different nations might be utilizing those things or not utilizing those things. And there's this idea of that the person watching the sport has this right of knowing, particularly at an Olympic level. Like, the consumer of that content doesn't really need to know. Like, I think it's important for athletes that they're hitting records and that they're able to compete. But I don't think we'll ever get to the point where everybody is going to know everything about the opposition or about every competitor within the sport, because that simply won't happen. There's always a competitive edge, whether that edge is coming from better coaching, new tactics, whatever it is, pharmaceutical doping, technological doping. It happens at every sport, at every level. So I don't think we'll ever get to the point where there's so much transparency that everyone will just accept what's going on, because there'll always be something hidden behind the cloak.
Josh says day one of the squat challenge on yesterday. Great stuff, lads. Hitting some
Nice.
deadlifts. Best of luck, Josh. Hope it goes well for you. I'll be looking forward to the submission at the end.
Drew says, how much transfer does a heavy sled push pull have? I get massive pumps and it's fun. Is it good for bilateral work, like replacing a lunge in a way? Thanks from Atlanta, Georgia.
You've been to Atlanta?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Is it warm?
Very warm in the summer.
What's the countryside like?
Pretty cool. I shot my first year within 2 miles of the Atlanta, Georgia, or of the Georgian border.
No way.
Yeah. Yeah. Massive city. I wouldn't be a big fan of the city now, to be honest, but Georgia's pretty cool. And the people there are so nice.
Super nice.
Yeah.
Is it the south or the
It is the south.
Oh, okay. Isn't the southern hospitality a whole thing?
It's, yeah, and it's definitely a thing. In terms of replacing it, no, it doesn't. Sled pushes, sled pulls are really good for conditioning, but they're not necessarily going to replace much of the weight room work we have unless we're using that weight room work for conditioning. If you're doing something like 50 meters of walking lunges as part of a general work capacity piece, then certainly a sled push or a sled pull could get a similar effect. But if you're looking for it in terms of strength, in terms of power, in terms of absolute expression of any of those things, sled work really isn't going to get us there. Sled work for real specific people, whether you're pushing a bobsled, whether you're working on scrummaging, whether you're working on whatever it is, sled pushes can be quite effective, but they're never going to replace the main weight room work, but they're amazing for general work capacity.
Some people definitely like them for knee rehab in certain scenarios. And no, Mr. Knees Over Toes didn't invent that. People have been doing them for a while. But yeah, they're not replacing lunges, because lunges, no one's ever done sets of lunges and been like, man, that was fun.
No.
That was fun. Freaky said, cheers, lads. Thanks, Freaky, for another long-time viewer. What's the best type of belt for weightlifting? Is a tapered leather belt generally is the best. You can definitely use the Velcro belts, but a lot of times they have a habit of just squeezing things in rather than letting you squeeze out or push out, and then they kind of add a little bit of security to the outside of that. So a tapered weightlifting belt offers a better kind of structure to use. At times people will get a Velcro belt and tighten it too tight, and it's not always great. Now, a Velcro belt still is quite convenient and quite comfy for a lot of people, so I'm not going to say it's not going to be beneficial. I'm pretty sure Illy definitely used a Velcro belt for his biggest lifts. Now, the problem with Velcro belts is they've often exploded on me during a lift.
My God, yeah.
And clean and jerks and squats. So
I think you need to accept with a Velcro belt that it's it sounds quite funny to say, but it's in some ways a disposable item.
Yeah.
That Velcro ain't going to last forever. You might get a year of training out of it. You might get 2 years of training out of it. But like, let's say your leather belt you're using, conceivably you could use that for the rest of your training career and it won't wear down too much, you know? It'll get a bit of a patina on it. Leather might soften up a little bit, but with the Velcro ones, you're really looking to have to replace them quite regularly.
Yeah, I'm on my head. My original tan one from Hook Grip, but someone stole it. Bastards.
Ayush Kamat says, for weightlifting, would you program calf training, etc., for ankle health?
Yeah. I mean, at any point for joint health or mobility, is there ever a reason not to take the muscle through a full range of motion?
No. What I would say is, I definitely agree with that. I think it's never going to be massively harmful, but most weightlifters probably need more ankle mobility. And so in that case, if you're just doing calf raises like sets of 15 or something for hypertrophy, that's not really going to be the most effective thing to make you a better weightlifter. But certainly a bit more muscle training is never going to be a bad thing if you have the time to do it though.
Muscle.
Muscle.
Bit of muscle training. Big Ben says, for 50-meter freestyle, how can I increase stroke in the gym? You know, we can actually give you a good answer on this one because I don't know if you know, Ben, we didn't really talk about it anywhere, but only a few times. We helped Cameron McAvoy. He's the fastest natural freestyle or the natural or lack of enhanced games this year. So I'll tell you what we did basically. I'll tell you what he did.
Big heavy weighted pull-ups, then pull-ups moving fast. Big heavy bench, then bench moving fast.
So in his, where's January? So strength work in January and February was shoulder width weighted pull-ups, loo raises, dips, toes to bar, high bar squats, squatting, super beneficial. Barbell rows, prone rear delt flies, straight arm lat pull downs, super arm plank, barbell rows. Then we plyometric work was or jumping, depth jumps, box jumps, belt squats as well, GHD back extension holds. Don't forget the posture. And then they've stayed pretty similar. This, if someone was like, this is a 45-year-old mother of 4 who's never done any training before, you could probably run that program as well.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, it's mad.
So then in the GPP power phase, there were seated box jumps, very similar stuff.
Very similar stuff.
Don't forget the posterior stuff in your power for the stroke. Don't forget your ability to maintain your posture and doing a lot of that back work. Not obviously for your ability to pull through lats and back, but holding that posture in the water makes it a bit easier.
NFNC says, are hypertrophy phases really needed if gym sessions always have accessory lifts to add volume? Track cyclist, the question is for everyone, I guess.
So unless, so a few track cyclists throughout the years, and I have some currently, unless you're really high level, you can go pretty similar throughout the year in terms of your training, but then the higher level you get, the more competitions you are, the more you'll have to ease off. Now, a lot of times a hypertrophy phase for athletes is actually a chance for a break. It's an opportunity just to move away from your sport for a little bit, move away from those hyper sport specific movements and move away from the heavy lifts. And it's an opportunity to bridge the in-season with the off-season. So you're in your in-season, you're doing lots of your track work, you've competition every weekend or 2 weekends, and you're going to town and you're trying to maintain your lifting, you're pretty tired, if you're playing rugby or swimming or you're beat up, whatever. The hypertrophy phase initially just gives you an opportunity to kind of do a bit more fun training, psychologically rest from it, prepare yourself for the heavier lifting later, but have a very decent bridge and a very clear break between high intensity sport and heavy lifting. In terms of, okay, if we take that aside and you say your load management is fine and you are recovering well for training and you don't feel like you need a big break, even though you should probably take it anyway, and assuming you're structuring your training reasonably intelligently throughout the year, you don't necessarily need the hypertrophy phase. It could look on paper like a high volume phase as opposed to a specific hypertrophy phases. Now, when it comes to track cycling, your components are similar to a sprinter in some ways. Bit more emphasis on the top end strength number, but you're obviously looking for a power to weight ratio, so muscle mass, less body fat at the right body weight, and then you're looking at increasing the top end strength numbers, and then if your strength numbers are good and your power to weight ratio makes sense, is obviously having great conditioning numbers specifically on the track, and then having some off track, so stationary bike wattage numbers. A watt bike is a fantastic thing to use here, and it gives you a very direct output. Then measuring things like your calories while you're doing all of that, all your conditioning, measuring your heart rate. So you're trying to get more efficient, but get more outputs at that efficiency, and you're trying to balance those things. So if you're looking at a conditioning session, you're looking at calories, heart rate, average heart rate, peak heart rate, and then you're looking at wattage on a bike, for example. So the hypertrophy phases are oftentimes needed. Say, if you take a rugby player, for example, they're probably going to have lost a bit of weight, or their body composition might have changed in not a positive direction. They might have lost a bit of muscle mass. They probably have lost muscle mass, actually. They've probably gained some body fat. And so they're in a position where they need to kind of reset everything a little bit. So for track cycling, this would be a little bit different because obviously you're not getting impacts, and it depends on how far you're pushing it. So to give you a very definitive but also completely open answer to your question, it depends on your situation, but in some they are for sure.
Sev said, question regarding the snatch grip width. I am tall and have monkey arms. Even gripping the bar at the collars, the bar sits well below my hip crease. Do I just have to deal with it? Yeah, you have to get good at making contact in the upper third of the quads. It's certainly something many, many, many people do very, very well. So you just have to get there. You just have to make sure, like building a really strong upper back and a really strong mid back will actually make a huge difference how high that barbell can come up. A lot of time people are losing posture at the top here. They're losing an extra 2 or 3 inches of barbell height. So getting big, strong shoulders, good positions throughout that entire pull will make a big difference. But you just need to learn to make contact in the right place.
Kind of thinks that bless up so you get strength. Marcus says, you guys recommended doing Norwegian 4x4 for rugby. How does it progress from week to week? Doesn't feel right doing same sets and intensity. So you're not doing the same intensity. You're putting more effort in. The whole thing with Norwegian 4x4 specifically, or high intensity training, is you're trying to push that heart rate as... Oh no, battery's dead. That was at 75%.
Oh my God.
What?
Are we still live? We're still live.
No, are we still live?
We are, I think. Let's keep the train rolling.
Are we still live? Can someone type if we're still here in the chat? Someone just say, yes, you can still hear us.
Can you hear me now?
No, I don't know if this will reconnect or not.
Camera is back.
Are we back?
Are we back?
How long was that? So we're currently on... Man, we need... Those Sony batteries do not last. Oh, we're still here. Okay, perfect. So, sorry, back to the question. That's slightly confusing in regards to or if you're going from strength training to conditioning, but you're trying to do more output, measure that in calories or wattage, calories on your Garmin or your Polar or whatever, wattage on the bike, revolutions per minute at the same dampener intensity, and then you're trying to either keep your heart rate the same or hopefully decrease that in some ways, but you're trying to increase your output. So you need to be pushing, say in the Norwegian 4x4 specifically, you need to be pushing that heart rate really high. So it's the effort you're putting in. And so what you want to see is that average wattage going up, or the peak wattage going up and then slowly decreasing less, or say your peak wattage starts here and it finishes a little bit higher than it did in previous weeks. So you're just trying to put in more effort. I just don't think I've ever met someone in rugby who you've been like, you're too conditioned for this season.
No, it certainly happens where people are too light.
But
they put too much emphasis on conditioning. But that's a misappropriation of...
Yeah, but how often does that happen?
Well, it happens quite a lot with some of the backs.
Yes.
Like they have really good conditioning and they shouldn't be doing more of it. But generally, you can always get better conditioning. The only other thing I would add on to that is the Norwegian 4x4, in the same as all of your other additional conditioning you're doing, whether it be with team or whether it's on your own doing your work-ons, this is all additional to the work you're doing all the time. So this idea of forced progression constantly and having to constantly feel like you're doing that Norwegian 4x4 session, even if your heart rate's the exact same, your exertion is the exact same, if we had an absolute measure of calories burned and energy expended during those sessions was the exact same, you're still gaining work capacity and you're still gaining that ability to be aerobic and anaerobic very efficiently. Like, you don't necessarily have to be putting an extra 5% or an extra 10% in every single session, because these are your additionals, they're your add-ons. This isn't the sport you're doing, this is an accessory for the sport that you want to do.
We32 says works at Pure Gym, runs 5-day classes a week, mainly lift and glutes, legs, and core. I run these classes around 40 seconds on, 20 seconds off. Would doing the whole class while lifting 10 kilos affect my weightlifting? So, yes, is the answer, because you're just doing a lot of activity there. Unfortunately, it's unavoidable. Obviously, your source of income is probably more important than your weightlifting. So, yes, it's going to affect your weightlifting. What do you do about it? You will adapt with it after a certain period of time. So obviously, if you're doing this for quite a while, you're going to adapt to trying to tolerate both of these. But ultimately, no matter how well adapted you get, it would just be better if you weren't doing that. But obviously, finances, career is generally much more important here. So if it's temporary, just put up with it if it makes sense for your career. And if not, then put up with it, because that's this might be the best career for you. You might love this, and doing these classes as part of that Pure Gym contract. So yeah, it will affect your weightlifting because it's just pure energy output. You're spending more time training. It'd be better if you just sat stationary for 10 hours or didn't do anything between training sessions, obviously. But unfortunately, it does affect it. Now, how much does it affect it? You're going to adapt to that really well over the course of several years. But again, it would just be better if you didn't. But it's also good to have a place to live, food to eat.
And good work capacity for your weightlifting sessions.
Yeah, yeah.
Sushi Nader says the invitation for Randori still stands. Sushi Nader, where are you based? Bart says,
He's just talking about the 4x4.
oh yeah. Oyer says they added 2 weight classes already to LA, 6 male, 6 female. They may even go up the gaps.
But they didn't increase the number of athletes who could go. So it's just going to reduce.
Yeah.
It's going to make it even more competitive per class.
Wade says, for firefighters and others with unavoidable sleep disturbances, any particular program differences you would utilize compared to the average athlete? So the best thing, or one of the first kind of allowances you have to make, is your timing and the layout of your week around those night shifts or around those longer shifts where stress levels might be very high. There's a lot of our training week isn't very high intensity sessions, isn't incredibly heavy lifting or fast sprinting. And those sessions you can still do around those shifts. So let's say you're in between your 2 night shifts, you finish at 7 a.m. in the morning, you go to bed, get up at 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. in the afternoon. You could certainly do a lighter intensity session there, or a session that doesn't have heavy snatches or clean and jerks or really fast sprints in it. Those kind of lower load sessions you can get done in those interim pieces when the stress levels are still very high or our sleep quality might be very, very good. And then those more important sessions where we have heavier lifts, faster sprints, more difficult sessions that will tax us more neurologically, they should go to the more rested days. So it's not necessarily best to do it on a day when you just finished a night shift or you just finished 3 12-hour shifts in a row. Maybe take a full day of rest then, and then when you're feeling really fresh, have that good session put in there. This does take a little bit of extra reading or a bit of extra timetabling on your behalf, because you have to review the week of training. You have to review all the sets and reps and sessions within that week, and then say, okay, this exercise, these sets and reps, this superset, this session itself will require a lot of me. I'm going to put that on Saturday when I'm going to be quite fresh, or I'm going to put it on Tuesday when I'm going to be quite fresh. And let's look at the other pieces, the other accessory work, the other work capacity pieces, and let's put those in those non-ideal training times.
Tom Miller. Oh, it is Tom Miller.
Mm-hmm.
Building a home gym, shed, bricks and mortar. Any thoughts on best rubber flooring with cattle matting suit? Yeah, it will, but it wouldn't be the best option. You're better off getting the actual gym matting that's available is very expensive in a lot of places now. You're probably looking at, a reasonable size home gym is going to be €1,000 realistically, if not more. Ideal scenario is you get the poured epoxy over top your concrete, the professional one. That'd be unbelievable to have in a gym.
Yeah,
But
but that's $4,000.
yeah.
I would say just go with like Crumb Rubber Ireland were a really good company. We floored our gym with that. A good few friends of mine who opened gyms in the years after that were going with very similar Crumb Rubber matting and had very good outcomes from it. It is kind of a buy once, cry once situation. You'll be able to bring that matting with you wherever you go, Tom. The problem with the cattle mats and the stall mats, even if you go for the really high density stuff and the really heavy ones that are more expensive, they'll still curl up on the edges. Basically, once you start loading the center of that mat, it will spread that rubber out. They'll still curl up a small bit. They're not really useful for stacking together and kind of puzzling out over the entire floor. Whereas those 1 meter by 1 meter mats or 2 meter by 1 meter mats that are made for joining together do tend to work much, much better than that. And the last thing I would say is if you can get them with the jigsaw puzzle edging, definitely get the jigsaw puzzling edging. It might be around 15% extra on your overall bill, but it's going to just make for a so much smoother installation process. And also, you'll never have to think about joining them, sealing the gaps. You'll never have to think about one mat flexing more than the other and it kind of walking its way across the gym, which they do all the time. I would say, unfortunately, you kind of just have to go with a Crumb Rubber solution. Also, just ring those companies because a lot of them have surplus or a lot of them will have odds or seconds that came through with an order that mightn't have been collected on. They mightn't necessarily have to charge you full price for those.
Christy said Solomon Nelson critiqued Jeff Nippard's bench program, saying 4x6 at 85% in week 3 is impossible. Loads of run the RTA have hit 3x8 at 85% in week 4, day 2. Why the misconception from science-based? I would say, to be honest, I don't know what the program looked like in terms of Jeff Nippard, and I don't know much about Solomon Nelson other than the videos he made on Mike. And I assume he's just not very familiar with strength training, or maybe he doesn't coach a lot of people in strength training. So if we're assuming this is a physique-based thing or that's their primary concern, then maybe his understanding of strength or how coaching people just isn't in that area. I would say probably just a lack of understanding of, maybe he doesn't do a lot of coaching in terms of strength training. Misconception from science-based. A lot of science-based strength-related work sucks as well. Just look at the studies by themselves. A lot of them are just not great, as we kind of talked about before in other aspects. They just don't really reflect good scenarios or what training scenarios would look like if you're trying to put those in from going from research to actual programming for people. What could easily happen is you could look at those research and decide that that's the incredibly definitive answers for how strength training works. And then something outside of that, you could be like, this doesn't make any sense because the science doesn't say, but in reality, that's not how things work in reality. So probably that.
The major issue here, right, is someone's going to pull up a chart. And this is what's happened here. Someone's pulled up a chart and said multiple sets of 6 at 85% or above is impossible because sets of 6 aren't equated to 85% on those charts. 5x5 is probably 70 or 75%. There's a handful of problems with that assumption, right? The first problem is if you're a month into training and your ability to squat those weights or press those weights or do whatever it is with those weights has not changed, your training is crap anyway. So sure, on day 1, there is a relative percentage at which you can do 4 reps, 6 reps, 8 reps, and 10 reps. But the second problem that comes along with that, aside from the fact that by the time you're a month in or 2 months into a training program, your 1 rep max really doesn't exist anymore anyway, except in your head. But the second problem that comes around with that is people's relative ability, like their differences between people, are so vastly different in terms of their work capacity and ability to do multiple sets of high rep squats or presses or anything to do with strength training, is that those charts are pretty much useless in almost every case. Those charts are useful in your first 6 months to 12 months of coaching. When you're writing training programs, everything is pretty much theoretical, but you need a baseline to say, Owen, you're my first client. Owen, you're going to do sets of 10 on day one. What am I going to prescribe as Owen's 10 rep weight that he's going to use for that? And that's where those charts come in. Now, once you pass beyond that level of understanding, you start realizing, okay, Owen might have done a different sport, or Owen hasn't trained in 6 months, or Owen's been training really hard for the last 6 months. And so that set of 10 is probably going to be 15% heavier or 10% heavier than what the relative block will give me. But this idea of that being 84% that it's impossible, like the quoted thing here, right, is on week 4, day 2 of one of our squat programs. It is the most run program we have. Your over 10,000 athletes have run that squat program now to incredible effect. That day 4 or week 4, day 2 is 3 sets of 8 at 86% or 85%. And so what happens in that case is we always get questions. On week 1, someone will see that and they'll say, it's too heavy, I can't do it. We just tell them, go and do the session and see what happens afterwards. Most of the time, people go and do that session, and the vast majority of people smash 3x8 at 86%, and they're unbelievably happy. This does 2 things for us. Firstly, it gets them to stop thinking about the old 1RM because that really holds people back. And secondly, it allows people to really push hard without pushing them for a 1RM or a top single in a training session and wasting a load of time. The second thing that can happen is someone goes to that training session and they do a set of 6, a set of 5, and a set of 4. And they say, oh, I failed the training session. Why would they program it that much? Well, this allows us to push people to the point where they're failing, or point of almost failing with their strength training, without having to put an excessively heavy load on them. And then suddenly they've hit a 6 rep max, they've hit a 5 rep max, and they've hit a 4 rep max than they've ever done in training, heavier weights than they've ever done in training, purely because they've been told they should be doing 3x8. So there's multiple reasons you'd have heavy days like this in there, but I can't tell you the amount. We probably replied to 1,000 emails and 1,000 questions about that session, and the amount of people who go and smash it is crazy.
In terms of the Sullivan video, he's using a prediction chart. So 1 rep max calculators, like they're so useless and inconsistent. You know, you'll have one that have an average of 10 of them, which is useless in the fact that why are 10 different supposedly scientifically rigorous calculators giving you multiple different answers? No, I wouldn't be using a calculator there. What he'd like to see is that, yeah, we tried this at 100 people and none of them could hit it by week 3. Then you'd be a lot more concerned. That's a lot more productive. But just going by a 1 rep max calculator for a bench session when you should be going up, your capacity should be going up several weeks into a program. You know, I
think this kind of stuff does more damage to the world of sports science or scientific about training than anything else does. Because people will look at these studies, they'll cherry pick something like that and say, no, we know this data exists. Mm-hmm. And they won't give any credence to all the actual experience. Like Jeff Bezos' thing is like, when the anecdote disagrees with the scientific data, I usually agree with the anecdote. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem with a lot of these poorly run studies, very poorly perceived and interpreted information in those studies. And then that's being flaunted around like it's some sort of religious text.
Yeah, the 1 rep max calculators just...
I can't think of anything more useless in the world of S&C.
Yeah, they're definitely... But if someone's critiquing that, then I prefer them to be able to say confidently themselves, you know, that they're... No, we've seen lots of people do this. Or you can say, I've seen tons of people never be able to do this. Yeah, those max calculators, I wouldn't put any stock in them. So this is what he's using in the video.
Satellitium says, thoughts on, to become a great coach, you must have tried to be coached before. I think so.
You must have tried to be coached?
I think you have to have gone through the thing of being the student.
I'm trying to imagine me getting here without ever being coached.
So it's not necessarily in the way of, I don't necessarily think from a learning capacity, that let's say if Owen had never been coached by anyone, that you'd never learn that information. But I think from a pedagogy side of view, or point of view, or a pure teaching point of view, I think it's valuable for you to have gained that experience of sitting down and being told to do something by other people.
I suppose the question here is, do you have to have had that done to be a great coach?
Realistically, everybody's been coached. Like,
Yeah,
everybody's gone to school.
it's kind of an
Everybody's
unanswerable.
learned things. Yeah.
You'd have to do it in a vacuum.
Do you think you'd have to be a great athlete to be a coach? Definitely not.
But do you have to have been coached? It definitely is a very big positive to being a coach, is getting coached, which I actually think is something some people in the industry, if you're making the industry, the porn industry, if you're making content, you're a coach, is they're afraid to say that someone else is coaching them or helping them because it makes you seem like you know less, or that you're admitting that you don't know something, when a huge part of having a coach is not necessarily the knowledge, it's just having someone be objective about what you're doing. I'm going to say no, you don't have to have it. But I would say you don't have to be a very special person to be able to get to be a great coach without having gotten coached. And it's definitely valuable for your coaching career to have been coached by someone.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
I'd put that in the same bracket as, do you have to have a basic level of anatomy and biology to be a great coach? You definitely do, but I'm sure there's some people who could get away without it.
Simon said good night, it's Japan.
Good night, Simon.
If I take gear, will all my problems be solved? Legally, I can't answer that, but
Painfulness says PCP pre-workout trend for intra Winstrol weed post. To be honest, there's only one of those things will be bad for your sports performance.
and it's not Winstrol, PCP, or Trent.
Ragtag says the programmed no contact cleans have helped a lot. I have a jump forward in my snatch too. Would no contact snatches in my warm up help too? Or is there a better place to start?
No, can I show you why? So no contact snatches can be a good exercise, but what'll usually happen with a no contact snatch is, if you can do a no contact snatch, it's very hard to discern if you're making contact or not. But what'll usually happen is, if you're jumping forward in your snatch and we switch to a no contact snatch, all we'll start doing is coming forward onto our heels too early and then jumping forward underneath the barbell. Whereas it's a lot more intuitive when we're doing no contact clean to learn to pull under without the contact. But no contact snatch, because we need to finish the extension, the tendency then is to overextend the hips.
Tom Miller says, Tom always has the good stories from the horse world. Interesting case involving FBI ref a horse trainer in the US called Jason Service.
Serbia.
No, Service below.
Oh, Service.
Was busted for PEDs, but was using something that only showed up as sheep collagen when tested.
Oh.
The horse is flying on it. That is so interesting. Like, obviously doping in the horse world is massive as well, but if you see things happening like that in the horse world and people are like, no, nobody at the Olympics is using gear because they're being tested. Like, you have to think of what's going on behind the curtain there.
Sushi Nader said, great video on deadlifting and programming. Thank you. I thought it was a good video.
That was a good video.
I said when I looked at it, I was like, this is a good video.
Mm-hmm.
You not say that, like, if you're making sandwiches,
John,
can you be like, oh, it's a good sandwich?
Yeah, have you ever watched a chef make anything? It's the best potato I've ever made. John Candler says, how much squatting would you recommend for somebody whose goal is mostly running based? A sub 90-minute 5K or faster trail races? I know I will likely lose some strength, but should I always lift heavy? So there's an amount of squatting essentially that you want to do to preserve what muscle mass you have in your legs, preserve that neurological drive and ultimate strength. You probably will never be able to do this and maintain 100% of your back squat 1RM, and neither should you be trying to do that. What I would say is back squat once per week, and then in your like this is assuming 2 S&C sessions per week for your running work, which I think is loads. On your second session, have some sort of squat accessory in there. That might be front foot raise split squats. That might be any number of leg dominant squat accessory pieces. But once per week with the back squat, don't go crazy heavy. You could start with 3 sets of 3, then go to 3 sets of 5, then go to 5 sets of 5 after that, then transition back down. Obviously, bumping up the weights as you go through those.
Would you ever release a pull-up chin-up program? I'm not going to say no, but it's not high on the list of priorities. Glory to Republic of Sikhistan. Where can I get the Republic of Sikhistan t-shirts when you're stocking? Probably Not anytime this year, to be honest. What brand of belt for weightlifting? I have the hook grip belt, and I think it's pretty great, and I've had it for years now. How important are semicolons? The real question is, when do you use a semicolon?
What? The real question is, what is a semicolon?
Doctor, dear lads, Dr. Johnny One Plate D Hum Lit. Holy shit, that's a name. Dear lads, how would a non-sprint event track cyclist strength training differ from a road cyclist? So the main thing here you're looking at is kind of the magnitude of gains or the magnitude of performance. Like if you just listen there where we talked about, say, Cam's strength training program, which could easily be a judo athlete's program or could easily be a track cyclist program, is the magnitude of how far you want those gains to be pushed and when you're pushing them. So a track cyclist, even a non-sprint track cyclist, is still going to have far higher demands on your strength and power output and probably your muscle mass requirements compared to a road cyclist strength training. So the magnitude of how far you're going to push that, for a really good track cyclist, let's say you're weighing 90 plus, 95 kilos, 92 or something like that. I'd like you to be able to squat 220 high bar with good form. But a road cyclist, if you could squat body weight for a few reps, you'd be like, wow, that's nice.
Yeah.
It's a strong road cyclist. So in that regard, it's not necessarily how would the program look different. It's more than how far do you want those numbers to go and when you're pushing them. So in this case, it's mostly the magnitude or the peak numbers.
Bilal says, can I run the RTA2 and the front squat program at the same time? No.
No, sir.
No. And this brings up a really important point. A load of people seem to be in an insane rush to get things immediately. Your back squat will do wonders for getting a heavier front squat, but you're not going to be able to get the heavier front squat right now in the next 3 months. Like, you have to just give the back squat the time. And with training, patience and perseverance and consistency is the most important thing. If you were to get one thing across to people to make them better athletes, it would just be that things take longer than you think they're going to take. It's going to take more work than you think to get there, and you just have to stick with it.
Thoughts on Olivia Reeves' claimed past program? Can't recall exact percentage of 1 rep max, but 1 rep max with a single set of squats twice a week with weight increasing if you hit 9 reps. How could such training give results? So is that 9 reps total or is that 9 reps per set?
Somebody later on says, I think it was, they do 85% of 1RM up to 15 reps.
Oh, that's
in
surely,
a set.
So that's surely total number of reps. In that case though, so we train younger weightlifters, if they're teenagers or what, really, so similar to that, you're looking at higher volume training for most of it. So that would definitely make sense. And obviously, sometimes freaky athletes are just super freaky. It's really hard to appreciate. People often think about this lifter on drugs or me, no drugs, me on drugs. You're like, I'm squatting 120 now. If I took drugs to 170. But there's some people out there with just insane genetics and they're so much better. Like the difference from you going on drugs to no drugs is still far inferior to how far ahead they are for this particular sport and this particular activity. So in some cases, in a lot of cases, just good athletes progress really fast. But in terms of the actual program, I don't really have any opinions on it. We've talked about this before. If you're teenage weightlifters, we like higher volume sets and reps for a lot of their younger career. Obviously, going for singles and stuff when necessary, but a lot of their strength training is a general work capacity. In fact, that would be the case for any sport, really. But how long could it give results? That'll become apparent as the training progresses and as she gets older or as the athlete gets older. You get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm probably, as a 75 kilo female, probably not going to be able to do 200 kilos for a set of 9. But she might.
Temp user says you've advice for some working shifts. Yeah, basically the exact same advice we spoke about with the shift work earlier, but the easier sessions closer to those big days. Aspect.
No injury questions.
No.
Yeah, the reason we don't answer any questions is because we don't want to lead you astray.
Yeah, the best thing you can do is go and find somebody who's a doctor.
Or
a healthcare professional. Tewaz Tim says you're just popping in to say hello. Sushinator says he's in Germany. Thanks very much for that. John Candler says,
wait, Cormac now?
I don't have Cormac here.
Where are you?
I'm just under Tewaz Tim.
No, you missed Cormac there now again. So
It's not
his is,
showing up in the thing. They might be deleted off this.
so it says neglected my leg training due to knee injury, and now my legs are weak. It's leading to small injuries, poor performance in my sporting advice.
Lots of leg training. Squatting with a pretty narrow stance and your toes pointed pretty much straight forward. Your knees going straight forward. Really focus on that around parallel period to get a lot of load through your quads. Then a lot of belt squats, a lot of squats with your heels raised. Build bigger legs and you'll get there in the end. It will take some time though.
Temas said cheers. He has to go.
John Candler says, would rather Ireland win a Rugby World Cup or an Irish weightlifter win an Olympic gold? Definitely a Rugby World Cup.
If you think about it, I suppose the World Cup would have more impact on more people and is more significant. One Rugby World Cup, as important as the individual medal is for that individual medalist, and at the time, most countries, unless you have a small amount of number of medals, just care about that total number of medals. So I would say, on a whole, the World Cup would mean more. The Rugby
Yeah.
World Cup, you win one World Cup, it's definitely remembered for a little bit longer. But, you know, can you remember every medalist from every weight class from even the Olympics last year, 14 months ago? No is the answer. Both would be nice, though.
Absolutely. Khaled says, what certificates do you recommend a recent sports science graduate get? If you're in anywhere this side of the Atlantic, get your UKSCA S&C coach. That's the most important thing you can get. If you're in the US, get your NSCA S&C coaching cert. Those two things are really where I think most people, if you're wanting to get into coaching, should be putting their time. I think it's definitely far and above, if you want to get into professional coaching, where you're going to get the most kind of gravitas for your time invested.
Right. Are we an hour and
We better go.
14 minutes? Okay. Thank you for all your questions. If you could just press like on your way out. Don't forget to check out the Seek Strength app at app.seekstrength.com. And you can ask us all these questions in the coach feature. So we got rid of the AI chat bot because real humans are better. No clankers around here. No tin skins.
Yeah.
No tin backs.
What was the name of the
Clanker is my favorite.
clanker?
Clanker is my favorite. That's my favorite.
It's almost derogatory, isn't
No,
it?
it is derogatory.
Yeah.
That's my favorite slur to use against AI stuff is clankers.
Is it a slur though when it's a
The
non-existent
way
thing?
I'm saying it, it is a slur. You know what I mean?
Thanks, guys. We'll be back again very soon.
Yeah.